Hey everyone, and welcome to another home theatre video. And today what we're doing is we're discussing the elephant in the room, and that is the audio. So right when I actually made the initial video regarding the new home theatre setup, the one thing I pretty much knew was going to happen was almost every other comment is going to be relating to the actual soundbar setup and the audio setup that I've actually got in this room. Despite the fact that I did actually mention it in both the projector video as well as the home theatre overview videos, that this setup has pretty much been rushed through. This isn't a final home theatre to build. This is basically just the beginning. This is just the first steps, and the screen and the projector were basically what kind of kickstarted the whole thing. So even for the channel itself, I did actually want to change up this room from the bright white room that I used to have to basically what I've got now, a much darker room, something that is a lot more light controlled. The fact that I actually found this particular deal on the projector that I'd been looking at, obviously I did kind of mess up because I didn't really look into the fact that there was a big change between the UK and the US version, and main reason for that was nobody had actually made a video on it. And that's why I'm actually surprised that some of the comments that I'm getting on the projector video are kind of like, you must have a faulty unit or you must be doing something wrong. It's simply that the UK gets an inferior product, and I will be making a sort of review video on the projector itself, so I won't delve into that too much in this video. But needless to say, it's one of those things where you have to weigh up the difference between what you're willing to pay and what you actually want. Now, when I was looking to actually upgrade from my LG C9 OLED, initially I was only looking at maybe going up to the 77 or the 83 or the 88 inch OLED, and that price point pretty much came into the ultra short throws range as well. So the decision I had to make was whether I wanted to stick to something that is primarily just the best picture type and quality that you can get with OLED, or go to something that is much bigger, much more immersive, and maybe sacrifice on picture quality to an extent, because you're never going to get those contrast ratios that you do with OLED. That side of things wasn't meant to have happened until much further down the line. So I was looking at maybe Black Friday, Cyber Monday kind of sales in order to get me in the door. The fact that I actually found a really good deal meant that basically I could get all of this a lot sooner. And that comes back around to the fact that this isn't a final setup. So the reason the audio setup is what it is primarily because I don't want to spend any more on this particular room right now, and what I have is very, very good. So it was good enough to the point where I would happily watch using my OLED TV in this room, and whilst it's never going to be as good as separates, you do get enough separation, and the DSP, the digital signal processing, as well as the rear speakers in particular with this particular setup. So I think that's the main thing that actually means that I can actually stick with this for a bit longer, is the fact that the rear speakers on this kit are really, really good. In comparison to the SPK8S, which were the sort of rear speakers that you used to get with the LG SL9G, which was the initial soundbar that I actually bought, these ones are much bigger, they're much chunkier, they have actual Atmos speakers built into the rears. I know Samsung as well as a few other manufacturers have had the rear Atmoses for quite a while, and they now also do the, I think it works out to like a 9.1.4, where they actually have the side firing speakers on the rear speakers as well. Now for my particular room, I don't think I'd really benefit from that too much. Main reason being that one speaker is pretty much in a corner, so any side firing sound is going to reflect straight away, which means it's not going to be heard where it is intended to be heard. And secondly, the opposite speaker is basically pointing, if it had side firing speakers, I'd get a very strong left hand side bias from my seating position in terms of what audio I'm actually getting. So if I can find a good deal on it, and I can literally do what I did last year, which was upgrade and basically worked out for free because I managed to sell my old unit for the same price I bought my new one for, then yeah, I may just do that in the interim. But it's not something that I'm really that bothered about, because the rears are very, very good. I do get really good rear sound in terms of rear surround sound effects, and also the Atmos effects. Whilst they're never going to be as good as actual in-ceiling speakers, they're probably the best that I can actually do with the current setup in terms of a soundbar setup. A few people have commented regarding high-end soundbars, and in particular most people tend to pick out the Ambios soundbar setup, and the main sort of comeback to that is the fact that no matter what reviews say, even when I initially got my first soundbar, I only got good sound when I actually got separate rear speakers. I mean, they can tell you that, yeah, it sounds like your sounds are coming all around you in their reviews from all the influencers, but the realistic situation is that unless you have separate speakers behind you, you're never going to get rear surround sound from a soundbar coming from in front of you. The other thing that you don't also get is really good separation between the center, the left and the right channels, as well as any side surround that you get from the fronts. Now, the fact that I've actually mounted my soundbar higher up this time means that any side surround sound is actually less obstructed. The ultra short throw sort of route of going down a big screen presents you with a few challenges. So the primary one is the fact that you take up the space of your center speaker, and the only way you can get around that is by doing what I've done behind me, which is to mount the soundbar or the speaker just below the screen itself. Now that means that you're left with a certain area or certain region that you can actually mount that speaker before it starts to interrupt the beam of the actual projector itself. The second problem is that the actual depth of the speaker, the width doesn't necessarily matter, the height you can kind of get around by angling the speaker as well, but the depth of the speaker becomes very important, and that means any enclosure that you use becomes very important. Now obviously all the people that are commenting regarding the audio system, most of them are probably in houses or apartments that have stud walls, so basically you can just use in-wall speakers. Now here in the UK, most older properties tend to be solid brick in construction, so that means you don't have a stud wall, so there is no air gap. So that means any speakers that I mount apart from on the ceiling have to be on-wall speakers. Now I know you can get shallow speakers, so shallow sort of cabinet speakers, however that obviously goes down the route where you have to then buy everything matched with that particular company if you do want that really good sound, if you want everything to be matched up. And generally it's good to try and go with the same company for all your speakers, just so then everything is matched frequency wise and also processing wise in terms of how it's set up with each individual speaker. And overall you're probably going to get a more balanced and a smoother sound than if you were to pick odd bits here and there, sort of like the DIY route if you like. And DIY, from what most of the sort of more experienced YouTubers comment, you can do really good DIY setups, but ordinarily it's normally a cost-cutting procedure that people use just to try and pull the price down a bit. It's not something that's done primarily to get the best sound. Ordinarily, if you want the best sound, then you would go down the route of getting everything in one particular brand. That way you know everything is matched. So in this particular room with my setup right now, the Atmos speakers is something that I could probably do quite easily, because obviously I have a normal ceiling, plasterboard ceiling, so I could mount them and obviously mount them close to a stud, because in the ceiling obviously we will have the frames as well as just the weight of the speakers themselves as well. With most of the enclosures that you tend to find for Atmos speakers, they technically don't even need a stud to actually balance on there. So the Atmos speakers I could do quite easily. Anything else is on wall. So any side surrounds, well, I'll deal with the fronts and the rears first. So fronts would be, center channel will be the sort of issue. I do have a reasonable amount of space between the floor and the bottom of the projector on each side. So as long as I don't go with too high of freestanding speakers, I could do the left and right channels quite easily as well. Probably not left enough room on the sides, just that side and that side, to actually get anything on wall there, but anything that's freestanding, because there is no obstruction, it would also probably balance out with where the center channel will be. So the center channel will probably be around this sort of height behind me, and obviously with them all three at the same level, it will probably make that front soundstage a bit better balanced, because everything is coming at you from the same sort of height. Now the second problem would come with the side surround. So on this side I have a wall and there is seating in front of it. Now as I mentioned, you can get shallow speaker boxes, so technically I could probably mount something there without too much of a problem. But to the opposite side I have a window. Now the only way I can think of getting around that is to literally place a speaker bang smack in the middle of the window, where it's not going to be too out of place, because essentially it's where the join or the border of the two panes of glass actually meet. Now it wouldn't look the best, but that is the only way that I would actually be able to get that side speaker. The other option would be to mount it higher, which personally I'm not a fan of. I don't like side or rear surrounds to be too high, because it ends up interrupting and muddying your Atmos channels. And that's one of the reasons why I generally recommend anybody with a soundbar setup or this particular setup that you mount your rear surrounds as low as possible to basically get them in line with ear level. When you're sat in your seating position, get them in line with your ear level, and that'll give enough room for your Atmos to actually work. Okay, so coming on to the rear speakers, and this once again is where having separates would actually probably benefit me, because right now the speakers, as I mentioned, they're really good. I'm really impressed by the sound that actually comes out of those in comparison to the main soundbar. These aren't the same kind of output that you get from separates that you would hook up to an amplifier or an AVR, but they're very good for what they are. But because of that, it means that there's a lot of electronics within the speaker enclosures as well as the Atmos speakers. So I reckon I could probably find on-wall speakers that are actually shallower than the ones that I've actually got right now in terms of the rears, and that would actually mean that they stick out less, which would actually improve this room slightly. So that possibly could actually be an upgrade in terms of the aesthetics as well. In terms of placement, it would actually give me a bit more flexibility as well, because right now the rear left speaker from my seating position is probably a bit too far in for my liking, whereas if I could find something that I can actually angle the speakers slightly, it would actually help me push that speaker out towards that wall a bit further, and then I could actually angle them a bit better to actually focus in on the center of the room. Generally, nobody else in this, whenever they're watching movies with family, nobody else is really that bothered. My son probably notices it, and my youngest daughter probably notices it a little, but my wife and my oldest daughter, they're not really that bothered. As long as they can hear what's going on and they can see the picture, they're happy. So it's only for me, for my benefit, that those kind of things really matter. But it's one of those things where when you do it, you want to try and do it as best as you can possibly do within the constraints of your room. And that kind of brings me on to the last point, which is a lot of people seem to think that a home theatre has to be something where it's a dedicated room, whereas the reality is that most people's home theatre generally is their living rooms. The fact that I had this room where I could actually make a bit more compromises in terms of the setup, the aesthetic, obviously the big screen behind me, means that I can actually get a much better, much more immersive experience from something that generally, for I would say the majority of the population out there that are interested in movies, TV series, these kind of things, and setting up something with regards to a home theatre, generally it's going to be as big a TV as they can get away with in terms of the wife signing off on it and fitting in the room and fitting in with furniture and things like that. One of the things that I didn't really mention was the fact that I had to get rid of the cabinets that used to be on each side. At the moment, they're just kind of in odd rooms. I will find a place for those eventually. But this current setup has a lot of limitations, and one of those being is sound reflection or echoes. So at the moment with sound bars, realistically, you can't really do any type of soundproofing or sound absorption. And the main reason for that is you're relying on that reflection to actually give you that side surround, to give you that Atmos, even your rears to an extent. The rears of this particular setup is probably the one area where I can straight away get some sound deadening panels on there just to absorb some of that sound. I don't want to just go down any route. I don't want to just stick anything on the wall. And here in the UK, with the cost of materials, I've actually been checking, and it's actually cheaper for me to buy ready-made panels rather than going down the route of DIY. I probably wouldn't go down the route of getting any posters or anything like that, because this isn't just a dedicated theatre space, it is used for the purposes as well. And for that reason, any sort of sound deadening panels that I get would either be a sort of dark grey or possibly a black or something like that. I don't think I'd go anything too contrasty. I did see a few blue panels that may look good because of the sort of LED scheme, but I think grey would probably be the best sort of compromise in terms of the current room aesthetic that I've got. On the rear, that's probably where it's going to make the biggest difference, and obviously the ceiling as well. Once obviously I do upgrade the audio system, then that will then give me the flexibility where I can start adding side reflection panels to actually absorb those first reflection points. And obviously everybody out there that's sort of into home theatre and into audio will know that as soon as you get rid of those reflection points, your existing setup will automatically become a lot better. Obviously that's the one sort of drawback of having this type of a setup, is the fact that you can't improve the sound by getting rid of those reflection points whilst you're still relying on those in order to give you that side surround. Now, a lot of my particular side surround does actually come from my rears. Because of how well I actually have it balanced, generally you don't really notice that your rears are overpowering your fronts or anything like that. As long as you get it set up and dialed in right, then it will sound quite good. But if you do lean back, or if you go behind the normal seating position, then you will actually notice that a lot of your side surround is also coming from those rears, so it is getting helped out quite a bit. But the front soundbar, obviously it does have those side firing speakers, and the majority of the work is still being done by those, and obviously they rely on the fact that it is going to reflect off those side walls and then come to your seating position. Probably around about there, the very first section is probably the one area where I could probably add some sound deadening material, but I don't want to really do it twice either, so I'd rather just do it once, do it right, and do it once I've actually got this all set up the way I want. Now, another thing to consider is where all the equipment would go as well. There's the cost involved, so this current setup is virtually cost me nothing. It was about 650 quid, and if you compare that to even your basic AVR setup with matching what I've got right now, so 7.1.4, obviously I probably wouldn't go down 7.1, I would probably go at least 7.2 or possibly 7.4.4, that sort of setup. Your AVR is probably going to cost you at least £3,000, and that's before you add in any speakers, any wiring, any of the work, because it's not going to be as simple as sticking speakers on the wall and plugging them in. You are going to have to route those wires, and all those wires are going to be visible because I don't have any gaps that I can actually run them down. Because of the fact that I'm painted the whole room black, these two corners, so the back corner and that front corner, do actually hide the light very well. So I could literally just run one thick channel down and hide all the wiring in there. But it's still extra wiring, and obviously that brings you to the other point, which is, where do you put all the equipment? The cabinet that I've got behind me, it's mostly enclosed. So I do have two open sections in the middle, but that's basically where I've got my Apple TV and PlayStation. It probably isn't big enough to be able to fit an AVR and all the other equipment and then give it enough ventilation, as well as account for any additional sound or frequency that they might actually add to the room. So that sort of equipment would need to go somewhere else. So that would then involve drilling holes, routing the cables through to another room, finding space in that other room to be able to put the equipment, and then also mounting that equipment in such a way where if you want to make any changes, you can get access to everything, move it forward, possibly a rack setup, something like that. So it's not as simple as, oh, you should have separates and you should have an AVR or a processor or an amplifier to actually run in this setup. Yeah, everybody's ideal situation would be an actual home theater, but in the real world, that's not really something that's feasible. And the idea behind my videos, and that's not just the home theater videos, that's my tech channel in general, is the fact that I like to do things for normal people. So people that have normal lives, that do actually do other things in that room as well. I'm still debating over whether to actually get full cinema seating in this particular room, or to keep it more as a sort of loungy, comfortable room where I can just have really big sofas, not necessarily reclining sofas, that everybody can just basically sink into. So I'm still debating between those, and that's something that I'm going to look at further down the line. Funnily enough, nobody's actually commented on the seating, and yet seating is probably one of the most important things when it comes to a home theater. When you go to the cinemas, you don't pick the seats that are really uncomfortable, and when you do, if you ever go to a cinema that's got those really old style, really uncomfortable seats, that's what you tend to remember more so than the size of the screen or the speakers or how well the light control was. All of those other factors, most people don't actually remember that, but everybody remembers if they've been sat in an uncomfortable seat for 3 hours or 2.5 hours, depending on how long the movie is. And that's something that nobody has actually commented on, and yet I did actually mention that this isn't ideal. This is, once again, just what I'm sticking with for the time being until I find something that is more suitable and appropriate for the room, because everybody has to work to certain constraints, financial constraints, constraints of the room itself, construction constraints in terms of the solid brick or the stud wall setup of your room itself or your property. So it's not quite as simple as just saying this is what you should have. Everybody would want to actually have the very best, but it's not always possible. possible. And I'm hoping that this series does actually get a lot more people inspired, because I've been inspired by a lot of the channels that I watched and some of the ideas that I took from them. Now there are going to be a lot of other people within the UK, within other countries that do have solid brick construction as well, and hopefully this series might actually give them some inspiration in terms of ideas and things that they might want to implement into their use, to basically just give them the best experience within their budget, within their property, within the room constraints as well. So yeah, I understand why people are saying it, and as I said, I knew everybody was going to make the comment, but this was the sort of video that I was going to make, where it just explains why things are the way that they are, and things probably won't stay like this forever. Eventually it will get upgraded. It's just a case of working with budgets and also finding a setup that is an improvement, a massive improvement, because the price difference will also be a massive difference as well. So you have to justify that. I'm more than happy to pay the money when something is good, but it has to be worth it. So if I'm going to pay £3,000, £4,000, £5,000 on an audio system, I want to make sure that it's a significant upgrade over what I have currently. And unless I get that, then I don't think it's worth just rushing into it. And the other part is, obviously I'm not the kind of person that settles for half measures. So when I do it, as you can see from the screen size behind me, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right, and I want to go all in. So yeah, that's basically the audio side of things. I imagine that some soundproofing, some sound deadening will probably be the next sort of follow-up. So as I say, if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe and hit the notification bell, and that way you won't miss out on any new videos up and coming. And I'd really appreciate if you also give this video a thumbs up. It'll help the channel out, and it'll help more people see this video and hopefully get inspired by it. And until the next one, thanks very much for watching.